pass the word on and this information on to them. And ultimately, it will be reviewed by the CYMPO TAC. So probably work it, it'll come back into this group and then I guess work through Dan, and Dan can present on behalf of EMAC to the rest of the TAC, those that have submitted application of interest, and allow the TAC to have a discussion as to how to fill the vacancy. Could be a simple process at this point. But I would think those in this EMAC would know best, those out there that might be of interest to the topic at hand. So any questions on that?
Is there anyone, I mean, I can think of some people in the community who are very interested in this area. So that's one consideration. I knew that they would be involved. The other consideration I have is there someone or some entity that could be useful for us in terms of getting grants and financial that would have strength in that area?
Those are great points, JD. I would encourage both of those, especially you really caught my attention on the latter, because I do think was one of the key pieces of this group coming together was, to really help the MPO out with being able to see if we couldn't pursue some additional funding available out there. So I do think you bring a couple things. Number one, that somebody's interested and passionate about the topic at hand, but maybe there is a skill set that the group is lacking. And if there are grant writers or people that specialize in that area, it would be very valuable to this group.
Maybe, ideally, we could find both qualities in one person.
And some of you would know that best if you're out and about. So I'm in full agreement with you on that.
So how do we get the nomination form to somebody we think is interested?
Allison, could you provide an email that form to everyone on the email? Okay. So yeah, Allison will email it.
Just that.
And I think if I remember right, and we looked at it, Allison, it's a pretty simple, it's like a one pager, pretty straightforward, so nothing too complicated. But yeah, I think having what's in mind from JD, I think is valuable.
Maybe we can talk at the next TAC meeting about like a, deadline by which nominations need to be submitted or something like that. We have TAC meeting on Wednesday, so that's good timing in that regard. I don't know if it's time to get that on the agenda or not.
Yeah,
For TAC.
yeah, we could even amend it too, because I do think that would be valuable, because I don't think we established at all anything. Once there's a vacancy, how quickly do you want to fill it in? I do think we have some time, because to Dan's point, there is a TAC meeting coming up, so it'd be good to talk about it there. But then the EMAC and the TAC won't meet for a few more months because of kind of winter holidays and breaks and all this.
Yeah,
So,
it's not like it's critical for meeting a quorum or something like that either. I mean, if it took a couple EMAC meetings to get it filled, that'd be acceptable. So.
But it is a private citizen position.
yeah, it is.
Right.
Yeah.
Correct.
And I hope I'm not stepping out of turn here, but I do think there would be some value in again, those, I don't know, maybe Dan help me out with this, but the applications coming back to this group for discussion again, it's going to be a TAC decision, but you could have a discussion with the EMAC and say, look, we got these 5 people that have expressed interest. Could you offer some comments? And Dan again will take that on to the TAC, but I don't know that it needs to be of any secrecy.
I agree.
I think the more people looking through it, more input to you and the TAC is valuable.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I think it's more critical we have somebody who wants to be engaged. Obviously he's able to make meetings, which are not all that frequent. So.
And the next meeting at this point, Allison, for the EMAC would be when?
Today.
We think it's going to be February.
Oh,
So-
geez.
So that would be the next JD, the next TAC meeting is not till February.
after Wednesday is
after Wednesday, so I mean, everybody, it's not, you're not missing a
Oh.
whole lot. So I would say the applications come back to the next EMAC meeting, you all discuss them in February, and then it goes on to the TAC meeting, but it's not like, nobody's missing a lot between now and then. Things are gonna slow down a little bit for holiday season and let staff catch up with things.
what, since we're still kind of in the area of the announcement of whatever, and I know I sent you the email and it was on Facebook as well, and I just wondered if CYMPO or EMAC, if any of you guys got any feedback from the community about that 3-car collision that was on 69 just south, no, was it just north of Lowe's or something? But anywhere near actually within the parameters of where we had tried to get the underpass, because it was all caused by a deer trying to cross. And this is what we've been concerned about for so long. And I just wondered if the public reacted in any way, like, why didn't you guys do that underpass? Those people wouldn't have been hurt.
Yeah, that's a fair point. If there was, I haven't, my office didn't receive any, I can't say that there wasn't comment given to ADOT or Prescott or someone else. And I'm not aware of it.
Okay.
And we didn't receive anything directly.
Yeah, same here. But that would have gone to ADOT, I would assume.
I would assume.
And I haven't heard anything.
So let that be the general schedule, though. The applications will come back to this group back in February. TAC will follow up with that afterwards. Dan will be your liaison as he is with this group. Just other general information. I'm meeting with the city of Prescott this afternoon with Mayor-elect Phil Good about the Sundog Connector project, which is an item on your agenda, which Daniel will go through. But Mayor-elect is wanting to see a public meeting sooner than later in the Yavapai Hills area. And that's our discussion, so stay tuned. My encouragement is we hold off on a public meeting at this point, since we'll be bringing a consultant on board right after the first of the year. So, we'll see if there is a community meeting. Again, hoping to hold that off, but I would say that's probably about the only real announcements I have at this point. And we'll talk more about the Sundog Connector once we get into it. Any questions or comments? Happy to answer.
Given none, okay. Next item is number 6, consideration and possible action to approve the April 26, 2021 regular meeting minutes of the EMAC. Are there any changes or corrections or comments anyone has? Would anyone like to make a motion to approve?
I make a motion to approve the April 26, 2021 regular meeting minutes for EMAC.
Well, second.
So we have a first from Elizabeth and a second from JD. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Deb? You're muted. Deb?
Aye.
Yeah. Okay, it's unanimous. Review, discussion, and possible action to approve the 2022 meeting schedule. Looks like we have the quarterly meetings scheduled. With the note that we can always have another meeting if needed.
Well, we just discussed having the next meeting in February, so.
Sorry, I misspoke. It was March, JD. I'm sorry.
So tax next meeting is February and next week March.
Sorry, any discussion about the calendar for next year for March 28th, June 27th, September 26th, and November 28th? And then if need be, we can add a meeting.
That's because hopefully we will be working on things and needing more meetings.
So, anyone to approve? Ready your motion to approve?
I motion to approve
Okay,
the schedule.
thank you. There a second?
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor say aye.
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 Okay, number 8, review and discussion of the scope of work for the Sundog Connector Design Concept Report and Environmental Overview. Daniel.
Sorry, one second. All right, is the DCR and EO showing up for those on Zoom?
Yes, I can see it, Daniel.
Perfect. So I've been developing the scope work for the Sundog Connector Design Concept Report and Environmental Overview, and we wanted to bring it to the EMAC. So a couple things I'm going to go over. Right now, we're hoping to get this RFP, the full RFP, advertised in November. Submittals will be back in January. We would have TAC and board approval in February, and then we would start the project hopefully 1st of March or first couple weeks of March. And that's kind of why the EMAC meeting is set for March, as we want to have you guys hit the ground running with whatever consultant is selected in March. So up until that point, there won't be a lot for the EMAC to do. But the main point is some of the technical language here in this RFP will still change in the next couple days before our TAC meeting. I've been working with ADOT and as well as some consultants, but the couple points that I want to go over with you guys are kind of around the EO, the environmental overview, and then wildlife. So the idea is for the EMAC to be able to provide comments to Dan Cherry, our TAC liaison, which then we'll go over the comments with TAC on Wednesday, and then potentially implement anything that we've discussed today. So I guess, do you guys have any questions? Does anybody either on Zoom or in the room have questions about kind of what you'd like to see out of this study for wildlife?
May I ask a question? We're doing a lot of reporting to TAC, which is helpful, I know, for the overview, but especially since we have Dan here now, are our concerns being forwarded to the executive board? Are they being summarized, reframed? You know, how is the communication from this group being presented to the executive?
So discussions like this and any changes that the EMAC have that are made to the TAC will then be reported to the board as well.
That's correct.
I'm sorry, I'm having trouble hearing. Maybe it's this mask.
What Daniel said is correct, that anything that the TAC gets discussed, that any recommendations for approval are eventually forwarded to the executive board.
Okay, but technically at this time, nothing can be simultaneously presented to TAC and executive. Everything has to be gone through and approved, revised, whatever by TAC before anyone on the executive committee sees it.
From the EMAC, you mean? Yeah, so the structure is the EMAC reports to the TAC reports to the executive board.
I just wonder what happens if there's something that we feel very strongly about and TAC doesn't. So I'm just throwing it out because I'm not trying to be a troublemaker, but I can see that, you know.
Well, I think that the idea would be that you attend a simple board meeting online or in person, and you can voice your concerns or.
Oh, okay, but let me be clear on that. My computer, I can't interact. I can listen and I can see, so that's one issue. But if I go and there's something that the TAC is not moving forward, that the EMAC has discussed and I feel strongly about, I would
Wait,
go to
let's back
this.
up. Is it you feel strongly about or the EMAC feels strongly about?
Both could come up,
Yeah.
both. But
Because this is a
if
committee
it's me,
that acts as a committee that forwards recommendations by vote, right?
okay. But if I then have the option, or any of us on the committee have the option as a private individual?
Absolutely, going to
Okay,
the call of the
okay.
public for the executive board.
I just want to get all of this
Yeah, by being a part of the committee, you're not foregoing public involvement in an executive board meeting.
Okay,
And,
because,
and I recognize that there are technological issues, and I'm hoping that our executive board is moving back towards having some in-person meetings within the next few months. I don't know really what that schedule is. Vinny, has that been discussed about going fully back in person for public included?
We haven't discussed it. I think it would be safe to say for the rest of this year. And there's, again, be clear, there's only one more meeting for
Right.
the TAC, one more meeting for executive board.
Right.
Those are scheduled to be virtual. Then the new year won't start until February, and we'll have a couple months to see where we're at. I assume, I hate to say it because then I'll jinx us all, but I'd like to think we could go back to in-person.
yeah,
With that said though, JD, I would extend the CYMPO office. You know, I don't know how convenient it is, but you're more than welcome to come join us.
Sure.
And our conference room, we will get you set up and you can be able to view, listen, and engage if you have public comment. And then if I can just echo what Dan said, I do think there needs to be a caution, I guess, between what is the EMAC committee and what's JD's personal concerns. The structure is absolutely welcome for JD to stand up and in a public comment, you can say whatever you choose, but I would hope as an EMAC member, again, you've given this forum, this committee, you know, your 2 cents as you usually do, you don't hold back, and that the group is moving forward. So that's the only point, I guess, of caution I would give, that, you know, at times I'm sure we're not maybe meeting the level that you would want, but to be clear about how you're expressing that moving forward, again, as an EMAC member.
well, and I think it's not just me, it's any of us members on EMAC. If there's an issue we feel strongly about. Of course,
Well, and-
some of you are because you work for an agency, I know that there are restrictions on guidelines for that, but at any rate, while there's nothing to disagree about, I just, you know, want things to kind of be clear. Because I do want to work as the team. I hope that EMAC goes forward and that the TAC is very welcoming of the work that we put into it and the recommendations we make, and that there won't ever be any problems, but I just want to have the foundation laid in case something comes up.
Sure, and I fully recognize that, JD. And similarly, any of the EMAC members are welcome to come to our TAC meetings as well.
Just always have it so early. It's so
Well, Vinny
long.
is trying to change that a little bit. so-
We are, we just sent out a poll. Well, the one coming up is actually an afternoon one. We have, the next one is 3 p.m.
Oh,
So
good, oh,
Next week
good.
it's 3 p.m. And then next year's calendar, we sent out a doodle poll or a survey, and it'll be an afternoon meeting, so.
That will make it much more accessible, I think, to many people.
Yeah, and again, JD, I hope, you know, bringing Dan as a liaison to this group, I think you've really raised the EMAC's engagement and interaction, and Dan's gonna be tracking, you know, what is the things that this group is getting concerned on, and be able to take that to the TAC group. So I think you have a valuable voice here.
Well, I do think that from my experience, you picked the very best person to be
Oh,
our
thank you.
liaison, because he has been supportive of this concept from the beginning, so. thank
Well,
you.
and I do think that there is broad support from the TAC on it as well. It really comes down to funding. And most of us don't even control the funding. That's where it comes from, you know, our board of supervisors or the city council or town council, things like that. You know, ADOT, State Transportation Board, I mean, we talk about State Route 69, and that certainly was discussed. I know it was. In fact, there was even some estimates that were put together for it, and it completely blew the budget
Right?
on that underpass. So,
Every time Chuck's boss came, the price went up $2 million every time he commented on it. So yes, there was discussion. But at any rate, and hopefully to all of those funding sources, we will be able to figure out a way to add in grants.
We've got a couple questions. We've got one from Elizabeth and then one from a member of the public too. So
all right.
Elizabeth, go ahead.
Mine was mainly just that there was a member of the public that has had their hand up for a little bit, and so That's just all mine was.
Perfect, thank you.
Barbara?
Yeah, I think I'm unmuted.
Yes.
Thank you. I have a concern, and I have not been to CYMPO meetings lately. And I think I expressed this on the first EMAC meeting I went to. What month is this? In the spring. And my concern is a couple of things. And as I look at this extended agenda, I'm really grateful to see it because it gives me some other points. If the soon-to-be mayor wants a meeting, a public meeting, and you want to hold off, I'm wondering why, because a public meeting is generally to inform, but also to get public input. Now, if y'all don't want public input, I can see why you want to hold off till it's a done deal. And my concern at the last meeting I was at was that it seems like decisions are made and EMAC is left in the dust and they don't get any input because, oh, it's already done, too late. I don't know what route was chosen for Sundog or what was chosen. I have not seen that. And I probably won't have the opportunity to see it. But I do know when I read this, that just appeared on my screen a little bit ago, that 10, the consultant will evaluate wildlife impacts and provide potential solutions. Well, you're asking EMAT to say what they want. I don't know if they saw this before or if this is an on-the-spot kind of thing. I would hope that they would get those, quote, potential solutions in writing ahead of time before the February TAC meeting, which then sends it to the executive committee meeting, so they could comment on those potential solutions and meet in January, not the end of March, but to actually have that information in hand so they can comment on the consultant's expert opinions. I don't see asking them now, identifying corporate, anyway, to identify existing issues. I mean, you got bicycle and pedestrian issues, you've got transit route issues, you've got all kinds of stuff packed into this areas of concern. And if you're going to have somebody evaluate it and give them that information, I think it would be timely to do that and get that soon, so then they could make intelligent comments on it before a decision is made, and then it's too late to make those comments.
Thank you, Barbara. So I think we need to get a summary of what we're doing right now. So this is a draft scope of work. This is not something that have to be done in 3 months. This is like
This will be a 12-month process at least.
Okay.
So,
Well, will some of it come before then? Will some of it come? Any information at all? Or do they have to find out this information themselves now? When you're asking them for their comments, how can they do that?
Right. So right now we're going through the draft scope of work. This is just a draft of what the process is going to be. Then they're going to reach out, and correct me if I'm wrong, Daniel, they're reaching out to get a consultant on board. So that consultant will be on board by
February, March.
March.
Okay. Okay.
And we'll start the process of implementing the scope of work.
So the idea with the environmental and the consultant is that we'll have an item, because this will be only a 15% design of the preferred alternative Sundog connector. And with the EMAC group, as soon as we have a consultant on board, we're going to schedule a meeting with the EMAC committee so they can discuss and kind of go through some of those options for wildlife throughout the study. So they're going to be on board day one.
Okay. It just didn't sound like that or look like that from this. And so what are you wanting commented on this now when you said to give your concerns? Well, anyone with a concern about wildlife is, there's huge concerns when you're putting in a new major road. But what do you want at this point then from EMAC or from any public?
So from the EMAC committee, we're just looking for any comments that they have on the scope of work right now. Some of the technical language could still change in the next week or so, but a lot of it's going to come out with the EMAC more towards March when we actually have a consultant on board. So in the scope, we're just listing that we're going to obviously be looking at wildlife and the impacts, and if there's anything else that's very specific that the EMAC wants listed in the scope of work, prior to them obviously meeting with the consultant in March.
Okay, because you had said Sundog is going to be starting around the 1st of March. What you mean is the consultant and the study. Okay. Okay, that's a big difference than where we're gonna start construction sort
Right,
of
this-
thing. Okay,
This is a maximum of
We're not even
15%.
near design.
Right, this is not a full design. This will be a 15% design.
Yeah. I see that. Okay,
Because part
Barbara-
of it's already platted, so the part through Storm Ranch and through Yavapai Hills, development through the private properties are already kind of aligned because they have plats approved. So the only part we're looking at is the connectors between those areas, really.
yeah.
See, connect to those areas.
And you don't want public comment at this point on anything, or you don't have to have public comment at this point on anything?
Well, there's nothing for the public to comment on at this time, I'm guessing.
I don't know.
Let me chime in there, Barbara, and add, I agree with everything that's been said, but again, just to be really clear, again, if this thing, if a shovel hits the ground on this, we're talking about 2 to 3 years from now. Between now and then is the whole planning, the design process, which is filled with many points for the public to participate. So I want to be clear, I'm not in any way opposed to public comment. I want public comment. I want to make it though where it's the most useful for both the public and what we're presenting. Right now, we have a draft scope that's up on the screen that gives the general parameters as to what we want the consultant to help us study. When they come on board in March, they're going to be with us for 12 months. We're going to have several meetings in the community in that area. We'll have meetings through the MPO, through other places. So there are going to be plenty of times where we absolutely want all public comment. So I'm not opposed.
Okay.
As to what you're seeing today, as to what the EMAC is reviewing, Daniel's presenting the general scope. So these are the general areas that we want the consultant to help us with, saying these are the areas that we need more information on. Right now, we do not have enough information on these things listed. So as they come on board, they're going to start to work with us, the public. They're going to start generating the specific information and get public comment. Does that help out a little bit more?
Yeah, because at the last meeting, I think it was about 69 or something, and it was called Too Little Too Late. You guys are too late. I don't want to ever hear that EMAC is too late again. If EMAC is there and they have a purpose, then that's just me as a public. If they're there and they have a purpose and they serve that purpose, I want to make sure that they get heard. That's where I'm coming
We
from.
were invited to the strategic retreat. They've been made aware of this project, so I'm with you. We want to let them know as soon as possible. And
Okay.
doing that conversation, we're talking a lengthy process. So once the consultant's on board, it's 12 months. And
Okay.
again, you have nothing to report until that consultant gets on board. We're trying to give that consultant, if you will, some general guidelines at this point.
Okay, I appreciate knowing the timeline better. Thank you.
Thank you.
So if I can jump off of that discussion and say, item number 10, that's here on the screen, consultant will evaluate wildlife impacts and provide potential solutions. That's a pretty broad scope.
Mhm.
Do we want to talk about as to how that might be refined? Like, should we be more explicit and say that it should include, an evaluation of wildlife corridors or something like that? That you want that in the scope, or are we okay keeping it broad? Because this is, in an environmental overview, this is, 15% design level. But if we're gonna have a wildlife underpass or something like that, you gotta make sure it's in the right place or they're not gonna use it.
If we just add in part of this, or evaluate wildlife impacts and provide some, well, I guess, and provide potential solutions that are in keeping with the preservation of wildlife corridors. If we made it more specific to the fact that we want those wildlife corridors to continue.
So my first question from an engineering standpoint is there a wildlife corridor that's been identified that crosses this line?
No,
So,
not specifically.
right, there
Other
hasn't been
than
like,
And we have
people's minds.
Elizabeth, let's
Right.
ask Elizabeth has her hand raised, so
Yeah.
let's, from the expert here.
So do we know if there's been a shapefile made for this corridor for the potential area of it?
What?
Shape
Shape
file.
file.
Oh,
Shapefile.
Well,
So I ran a quick, so I don't know, if some of y'all know, some of y'all don't. So the Arizona Game and Fish Department has an online environmental review tool that you can sign up for to have like a little portal so you can look at projects and things that people have submitted or create your own project. I just did a rough draft one while ago, like earlier today in regards to the Sundog corridor, and it kind of comes up with you give the buffer of what, or you give your project area, and then it gives a 3-mile buffer around that. And so I ran a quick ERT for some special status species. And what is showing up in the area is due to Watson Lake and it being, you know, right there in that potential zone of where this new road lineage is going to go. So there's a couple of things that have popped up, but nothing that's too, I guess, I mean, there are some sensitive species, like I said, because they use Watson Lake, such as yellow-billed cuckoo and southwestern willow flycatcher, peregrine falcon, and potential bald eagle overwinter populations. But other than that, there's just wood duck, you know, some of your normal species that typically use the area. And then I also went in and clicked to see if there was a linkage, like a corridor in there, and nothing popped up on the ERT when I ran it. But if I get a better shape file, I can rerun this and see if there is something that I can narrow down the scope of it. So I know whenever things start getting kicked off with this, Arizona Game and Fish will have their own input separate from what I help EMAC to provide. So I just want to give everybody a heads up that that's just kind of what I saw in the rough draft whenever I created that earlier today.
And also in response to your question and my answer, no, there's no designated corridor. However, Game and Fish has identified this area in an ADOT booklet on linkages saying this is, plus there was a study done just recently by ADOT and they had State Route 69 is the 3rd highest spot being hit in the state. But there was nothing we could do with the money, so that just came off. Right. So there is activity, and of course, we had an accident just last week, I guess, or late last week. Right. So there is wildlife, there is a potential hazard, but there's no trail, if you will.
you haven't, am I correct that Game and Fish has not put like radio collars on pronghorn and found that, you know, they migrate to this area in a specific area is what you're kind of alluding to, Elizabeth, is that correct? You're muted.
I was unmuted and then I muted myself. To my knowledge, no. I know we had some for the Great Western expansion up that project that we were looking at. Kind of like this is my map on the north east side if you're looking at the map. But as far as Sundog corridor, I don't think that we have anything in there. There's, as most of y'all know, you know, that's Glassford Hill. We did a removal project and removed quite a few pronghorns several years ago out of there. There are still some in that area, but as far as anything being collared right now, no, sir, there's nothing in there to my knowledge.
There was something done by Jeff about 1.5 years ago, and he reported it to the ADOT it was Wildlife Vehicle Collision Subcommittee or Committee. And he said we didn't write it in the report because it wasn't going to go for anything because we weren't going to widen the crossing. Right. But he said there were 77 approaches of mule deer. Yeah. Approaches meaning from either direction they come up to it, but they couldn't tell if they actually went through. Got it. But still, what that shows is a lot of activity.
That's for 69, right?
Yeah, but that's for 69, not the new project that we're talking about.
Yeah, so we're kind of getting off topic here.
Well, no, because migration happens one place and goes to another. And just because the Sundog corridor is here, if we're going to talk about wildlife corridors through it or around it or some way impacting it, you got to have connectivity. And that's the name of our group, is connectivity. So we need to look at that sort of stuff like what Elizabeth's doing in these areas north and south. Now the city's going to have a whole bunch of land in the Granadelles area here shortly, I guess. And there's a whole bunch of state land south of where the connector is going. And so there's movement in that area, and there are approaches from a lot of wildlife, coyotes, javelina, all that sort of thing. Nothing critical or endangered apparently that's crossing, but.
Well, I guess my thought then is, certainly I don't think evaluating wildlife impacts as proposed in the scope is out of the question, but much like we do for, the first several sections where you're doing traffic counts and things like that to collect some data, it sounds to me like maybe we need to include some data collection of some sort, or at least an evaluation of prior studies with respect to
And make it more
wildlife.
specific
Mhm.
to really, to make sure that it's a comprehensive and not just a cursory.
Right,
kind of
and what I
thing.
don't want is us spending, $1 million on a fancy crossing and having it in the wrong place where they're not gonna use it,
Yeah.
and we're still getting, animals hit. I mean, I don't know where this deer accident was last week, but I've seen nothing in the paper that says exactly where it was, that it was over the top of this box culvert that's underneath the freeway. If we had, had been able to get that in there, maybe you would have used it, maybe you wouldn't. I don't know, but these corridors around the state that have wildlife crossings and have sunk a lot of money into them, they still have accidents with animals on those, but they've greatly reduced them because they put them in the right location by studying the road.
The one thing with the 69 corridor, and I know that it's that train is less the station, but what we were proposing was that was going to be a safety feature, not only for wildlife, but for hikers and bikers and equestrian. It
Yes.
was going to be a multi-use.
You're preaching to the choir, JD. I totally understand. I got it all. I don't disagree with you. I wish I had a checkbook with $1 billion in it, and I'd write a check and we do it right the first time, but that doesn't exist at this point.
But I think that, as we're doing all of this and going forward, we need to keep the community support from these other areas involved as well. And, some people just may say, oh, well, the heck with wildlife, but I think that there'll be power and money if we can do a collaborative thing and looking at all of it. But I am thrilled that you're saying that you want to make sure that this covers all of the areas and doesn't just give this,
Right. Well, that's why we're bringing the scope to the EMAC too, because I've been working with ADOT and different consultants to obviously develop this. And they kind of said to leave it a little bit more broad so that way they could work with the EMAC once they start. But if you guys would, if the EMAC committee would like to see it being a little bit more specific, obviously we can take that to the TAC and get that in there as well.
So some things, so if we want to broaden this, we can put in identify existing corridors or identify existing studies or corridor studies. Just
Identify
Existing
corridors,
identify
studies,
the
and
value.
potential locations for wildlife corridors.
and maybe they can, if they aren't right, if they are right, they can be redirected.
Yeah.
But
just look at some of the other things that you see on the other ones to expand it out. So identify potential.
well, we're almost saying that we want some of the things included that are included in number 11.
Yeah, identify existing routes,
Bicycle,
kind of-
pedestrian, yeah.
I just know from experience that sometimes the more vague you leave it whenever you're developing a scope of work, sometimes it benefits you more in the long run instead of trying to narrow it down. Because if you get it too narrow, you potentially lose opportunity to pull other things in that could have been in that larger scope of work, if that makes sense to everybody.
Makes a lot of sense, Elizabeth. So let's talk about that for a minute. We want the creativity of the consultant to step forward because they're going to be putting forward proposals. We're giving them general areas that we want to hear about their expertise, their background on. This is not, the scope's not a legal binding document that is, going line by line and saying, hey, are you going to do this? We want them to be creative, innovative, and say, yes, we have worked in the area of environment, and here's what we would propose for Sundog Connector. What you're going to see in those proposals and what the TAC's going to review in those proposals is consultants that have worked in other areas that have done data collection or have done different types of connectivity. And so I think, Elizabeth, you bring up a really great point. Definitely want you to continue to shape this, but keep in mind that we're looking for their creativity. And as we progress forward, then we'll get very specific, but this is to generate ideas from the consultant in their proposal.
Yeah, and certainly, while big game is the ones that make the front page, it's, the smaller species as well that can be equally impacted in different ways. And we don't want to give the appearance that a scope is being directed towards mule deer or pronghorn or whatever.
We certainly need to save the badgers.
Yeah.
Mountain lion in that area.
And bobcats and everybody.
Can we put in a D for number 9 that says something to the effect of evaluate past studies? I don't see that in here. It may be in here, but I haven't read through it all the way. But review past studies that Game and Fish have done through here. ADOT just completed a vehicle wildlife collision report. They could look at that. Also, what I just wrote about State Route 260 or submitted to the committee, they could look at as well. So I don't see anything in here about evaluating, but of course, I know they would have to. Incorporate elements of the planning and environmental linkages, PEL, process into the alternative analysis, specifically around narrowing the range of alternative alignments. I guess that's saying what I'm trying to get at.
Basically, it says it right on here that this is a draft.
Yeah.
And I think we'll be in a better position to comment once the consultant's on board and when we get together in March.
Yeah, I guess, I don't know, I would pitch it to you. Is there anything, significant? Is there anything missing, And again, we're creating these general categories and terms, so more than anything, JD, and to the EMAC, is there just something that you feel is neglected? Speak up to Daniel, have him make a note. Dan will make a note, and talk with the TAC this week about it. But if you can live with these general parameters, absolutely. Once we have the consultant on board, they're going to sit here at one of your meetings and start drilling down, specifically what are some things that are going to be valuable. I think Chuck's point's great. There's existing studies that we don't want to reinvent the wheel. We can incorporate from, save time and dollar. So that's a great idea.
And we do have a raised hand from Barbara.
Yes, Barbara.
Hi, thanks. My gut is saying there are ways to ask for what you want. If you don't ask for what you want, you're not going to get it. If there are ways to ask for what you want that don't limit the perspective, and y'all know how to do that. And I would highly suggest being a little more specific in what you want. And I guess, Elizabeth, I'm disagreeing with you. I'm not a government employee. I'm John Q. Public here, but I really think that my fear is if you're not more specific, you won't get what you want at this point even. I understand it's a general plan, but you're being asked to make some additions now. And I would encourage you to mention a little more specifically about what you want in the long run.
Well, Barbara, also what we're trying to do is get a scope of work for the consultant.
Yeah, I know. And what does he need? Or he or she, what do they need?
Right.
I think, yeah.
I think, where it says identify and incorporate elements of the planning and environmental linkages process into the environmental analysis, especially or alternative analysis,
Mhm.
specifically around narrowing the range of alternative alignments.
Mhm.
And then it goes on and say evaluate wildlife impacts. I still don't see anything on previous studies other
No,
than
I
item
think
C.
that needs to be added, Chuck. I think that's a good.
Yeah.
I agree with that, that needs to be added to just
Yeah.
look and see what has been done. And then when the consultant gets here, we can review those and we can all kind of see what we've got and then hit the ground running to see
Yeah.
what might potentially need to be done to broaden some of whatever has been done in the past, or if we need to have something new, small, be brought to the table, just kind of depending what has been done in the past.
Thanks.
Because providing potential solutions, and I think just and then adding, incorporating information gained from previous studies.
Previous studies.
Yeah, and I mean, it's not, as I've touched on before, if we don't have identified corridors, maybe they need to do some game cameras or something out there to, collect some data. I think a little bit of data collection.
Yes, I vote for that.
Well,
And that all depends on funding. So, it just kind of depends on the year and if we have funding to do potential studies from Game and Fish. Now, that's not saying that ADOT can't go out there and put up game cameras as well and do a study, but when it comes to new studies and things, those are things that have to be incorporated into budget cycling and grants that we might or might not potentially get. So Madam Chair, if we could put this in the minutes, I will get with Jeff Gagnon and see what has been done in the past. And then where do I need to send that information if we have anything for this specific area?
I would probably send it to Daniel.
Yeah,
Okay.
Please send
Send
that
it
to
to
me.
you, Daniel. Okay.
And so for clarification, this really isn't an ADOT project because it's not an ADOT corridor.
Correct.
It's a regional corridor. So,
Right.
so it's gonna take.
What we
different-
don't want is a consultant coming back after you have a contract signed and executed, saying, well, that's not in the scope.
Yeah.
And we need to do it. That's what we want to avoid here. So
Yes.
if these points are well taken, I think, we can throw it into their lap as to whether or not the consultant, as to whether or not we want to ask them to consider some data collection. I mean, we're asking them to collect data with regards to traffic, so it doesn't hurt to ask them to collect a little bit of data on wildlife corridors, reviewing past studies, and evaluating what work's been done before. And then I think what we have stands pretty well, to be honest, and is broad enough that I think we can get to what we need without having an argument with the consultant. So.
If it's beneficial, I mean, I can always put in there that the consultant will be meeting with the EMAC once the project kicks off, just so it's stated in the scope.
But which
It's not a
I think
surprise.
is key, unless there needs to be, this is why we're having this conversation here, is if there's something specific that this group wants in this scope, now's the time to add it, because once this is advertised, it's a lot harder to change the scope.
Oh, that's a key point.
Because most of the area that they're gonna be looking at is state trust land.
Right.
John, you can unmute yourself.
When this
Hold on,
was,
there's someone from the public want to speak.
Oh, John, let's hear.
John? Yes?
Yeah, I was going to offer if I could, listening to the discussion and looking at the scope here. It's identified as an environmental overview. It's not necessarily an environmental clearance. And the scope is also for a design concept report. And the design concept report usually identifies it evaluates alternatives and identifies a preferred alternative to move forward with design. So part of the concept can identify what needs to be reviewed in a final design. And the environmental overview could be, maybe could be the same idea. They might not necessarily have to hit everything here as part of this scope, but can identify what needs to be done as part of the final design.
That's a great point, John. Thank you for adding that. And I think that's important too, because please again, keep in mind, if this process right here is about 12 months, then the design after that, if we proceed forward, is again, possibly another lengthy period of time. I don't want to say 12 months, but it's a big chunk of time. So again, maybe this is setting up for that design where it's a 2-year process of just trying to get these details worked out and get the specifics there. So, good point, John.
The other thing is, if there happens to be some big influx of, say, federal dollars to build this thing, that may kick over a bunch of additional requirements from an environmental or NEPA standpoint, and at that point you got to kind of restart things a little bit from an environmental impact standpoint too. So this will help to identify what the problems are, as John has said, where focus needs to occur in the future, and kind of ensure that we're not forgetting something along the way when this thing keeps moving forward. So
Another thing, we're talking 2 years for this and 2 years for that. The next 4 years are going to be massive development in that area.
certainly so.
Oh, yeah, you have Storm Ranch, which we haven't heard from. You have Yellow Hills who's wanting to move forward again for their other phase, which this goes right through. So they have their routes through their development already platted, approved, platted somewhat. So,
So the new.
but they can't move forward with the north part of the Yellow Hills, that section, until they have this connector to Storm Ranch.
A lot of factors to take into account.
And they might push a little harder to get something going. So have to be involved in this too, because they're gonna possibly be part contributors to it.
So is there thought of seeking federal money for this?
Yes, so just kind of a brief breakdown if we can. It's again, some of it's a little bit in the air and abstract for now, but if we're looking at roughly a $30 million road, looking at all the different pieces of the puzzle, realizing that Storm Ranch as a development with the city of Prescott is moving forward, has agreed to a certain initial portion, very small but significant, still like I think quarter mile, half mile development of the first part of this road. Then to Tammy's point, Yavapai Hills is in a situation with wanting to move forward with development, but city staff, police, fire, public works, and so forth have expressed serious concerns because of emergency access. So we're looking to have a discussion, we as in the city of Prescott, maybe CYMPO, Yavapai Hills, if we could talk with the developer, work with the developer to see if there's a commitment on their part to build an additional part of the road. As I presented at the retreat, if we're looking at a $30 million road and developer would be able to take care of up to 50% of it, we don't know, but that leaves maybe 15, maybe 20 million on the table for the region. At that point, I would like us to go ahead and pursue federal funding, saying we have public-private partnership developing this. We have made commitments locally through the MPO and the local public agencies for the initial design. I'm trying to do everything I can, I guess, Chuck, to sweeten the offer to the feds to say, we've all come together, we've done all these things. Would you be supportive of a $15, $20 million road? Keeping in mind that we've done all these local things first. But to answer your question, yes. But I'm trying to see what we can do to set things up to make the best possible ask, and that's what we're working towards.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, that's great.
And I would say too, and I think somebody mentioned this with the new infrastructure bill, you know, there's a lot being leaked out, potentially what could be in it. And things that might sweeten the offer could relate to environment, could relate to bicycle pedestrian. So, you know, over the next year, our grant could reshape based upon federal funding. And we could make that a key part of this if federal funding becomes available for things like that, which again, you know, looking at some of the initial things, that is going to be a part of it. So.
The other possibility is, you know, the way our state is going right now is if this, say this one-time funding that is being discussed with the state legislature and being pushed by RTAC is a successful one, they may come back to the table again a year later and say, we want to, you know, do that again. And maybe CYMPO, if they've gone through a pretty good planning level, maybe they make this their #1 priority. Maybe we're looking at an influx of $5 to $10 million, and maybe CYMPO decides that this is their favorite project for the region. And, you know, maybe it's possible to do something without federal funding, but I'm talking big bucks here, and in all likelihood, it's going to need some federal dollars in some sense or other.
Well, I think like Vinny said, we need to position ourselves in the best light possible to try and achieve all these goals.
Correct.
It's gonna be really crazy putting together the pieces of the puzzle, but I think it could work out.
Well, and by doing this study that this scope proposes, it puts us in a great position to chase money at that point. So.
And I will remind, and I know it's been mentioned, but for the region, the uniqueness of this one particular project is, again, is it's not an ADOT project. You know, regional projects that I've been involved with, and I think probably Dan too, have typically on this scale have been ADOT, there's been an ADOT component. So it's been very regular for us to sit at the table with ADOT like 69 and say, you know, we're going to put 2 million on the table. ADOT, can you put 11 million on the table? In this case, there's no ADOT in the equation. It's all the locals, the MPO, the cities, the county, and then again, the federal part. So it's just a little bit different structure than what we've done in the past. So for the region, it's different. It just makes the dynamics what we haven't worked with in the past. But still possible.
And also the key components, AZ State Trust land. So hopefully having federal funding will help us be able to better negotiate with the state land department for the easements.
Well, we have to purchase the easements through this trust fund.
That's going to be all part of the conversation of all the different moving pieces. So it's all part of the negotiation and the back and forth, just like with the developer too. You know, there's nothing on paper other than storm ramp. Everything else is there, and it's up to the region. You know, but we hope there's a conversation that can happen with State Trust, with Yavapai Hills. So far, the local governments are in support, but there's still a lot of questions to be answered.
So do we have a good scope of work? And I think these additions would make a good scope of work. So if we can get those in there, that'd be awesome.
I think Daniel made notes of them, and Dan heard you, and the meeting's on Wednesday, so I'm in support of them also.
Yeah, if you want to specify one more time, so I also can get them in the meeting notes, that'd be wonderful.
I think somewhere around 9C or 9D, put in something about evaluating past studies and make recommendations.
What if we included the word incorporate and review past wildlife studies? How does that sound, the language?
Read and review, okay. I'm good with that.
Or review and incorporate. Because you got to review it before you can incorporate it. But yeah.
And let's see. And I think 10 is sufficiently vague with that last statement that we can then, or that the consultant can still figure out how to bid this.
But the one thing that Dan brought up is, you know, if we're gonna review and incorporate data from previous studies, but Dan also with possible new research that we may, that, you know. that
Oh,
he's-
like cameras and all
Yeah,
that kind of
that we
stuff.
may do, if we're counting cars, we need to be, so I think Dan's point is really
I agree,
critical
right.
to add.
Maybe we just say, you know, coordinate data collection or something like that.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, if Game and Fish is interested in helping be a part of that, we're never gonna turn that down. Thank you, Elizabeth, but.
Wait, whoa, that's,
Trust me, I'm not forcing you
I'm
out.
not in research. Yeah, so I'll just have to check with Jeff and Scott and kind of see what we have and what could potentially happen, and then let y'all know.
Yeah, but I think if not, or maybe we supplement it or something, I think considering, you know, evaluating whether there needs to be data collection, maybe that's, you know, and part of this process.
Well, I'm glad that it's tied in with both pedestrian and bicycle needs too, because
And transit.
Right.
thank you for all your work, Dan. This
Pleasure.
looks like just a short report, but it obviously took a lot of time.
Thank you.
Might have been a coordination effort, yes.
Okay, so is there anything else on this in regards to adding additional comments? Or are we all good right now with what's been recommended? Deb, you have anything to add? You're muted. Deb, you there?
I do not. I thought everybody covered everything very well. I'm taking notes on a small laptop while trying to look and listen, so I keep not finding the mute button. I'm sorry about that.
It's okay. I just want to make sure we're including you in the conversation, so.
Well, you're a lovely woman. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so I think we're good on that for now until March. When we have a consultant on and hear more, what would they have to say? Okay. 9, update statewide wildlife vehicle mitigation plan. Chuck,
Okay. Oh, what I sent for you all to look at. What that is a case study on State Route 260 and what ADOT and Game and Fish evaluated, and I just thought it would be good background information, especially for some of the citizen people to read and understand some of the difficulties, some of the opportunities, and some of the technologies that we can use that are maybe not overpasses, but are effective ways of directing the little critters where we want them to go. So that's basically why I put it in there. I just want everyone to kind of be on the same page. The statewide vehicle collision evaluation came out finalized. I didn't send that out to the committee because there were really no changes made. They were just like small grammatical, you know, comma here, delete the word did twice.
Did they
You know, that kind
did
of
they
stuff.
finally differentiate between livestock and wildlife in the collision information?
Not in the collision information is still difficult to get. As we can just see from our conversation today with the deer that was killed 2 days ago.
I don't think the deer was killed.
Oh, wasn't it? Oh, they just avoided it.
The
And it
traffic
crashed.
had slowed down in order to, you know, let the deer go across,
I see.
and one person
Oh, I
barreled
thought the
ahead
deer was
and
hit.
caused.
But the point is,
It was involved with the wildlife.
right, right. And so the state of Arizona came up with this, had a consultant review all our studies and all that kind of stuff, and came up with several different ways. One is to completely fence the highway off, put crossings in, have exits and entrances for the wildlife to, if they get in by mistake one way, they can jump out another way. Obviously, that is the most expensive, the most constrictive, and very well suited for new construction, especially on federal land. But then they went into other alternatives like lights, roadway markings for pedestrians, not deer. And, just warning signs, that sort of thing. Whether we want actually worded signs, like some of these temporary signs we have for our maintenance guys, they say work ahead, that kind of stuff. So they suggested all those technologies, which is what we're looking at on the State Route 69 project, is to do minimal signage, striping, notification of the general public that this area is prone to wildlife crossing. And then the other one I sent for this meeting was a State Route 260 case study. So it's kind of the same thing. It gets into the results quite a bit. So that can help as well too, to understand all that stuff. That could be very favorable to us in the future for federal funding or some other kind of funding that if we're continuing having accidents on 69 and there's continued wildlife spotted on 69, to maybe somehow get money for something.
It's great that they put the economic benefit into it.
Yeah. Sorry.
Anything else?
No.
Any questions of Chuck about those? Elizabeth, you have your hand up?
I just want to make a clarification or ask a clarification. And I don't want to phrase this with sounding like I'm being rude. But do y'all think that state land is federal land?
No.
Mhm.
Okay, because the way I was like hearing some of the conversation, it sounded like a couple of people were thinking that ASLD was actually federal land. So I just wanted to make the clarification and not sound crude while I was trying to say that. So my apologies.
I wanted to make sure everybody understood that the areas that we're really looking at is state trust land. So that's an agency that we do have to work with. They are an agency, the state agency that we have to work with to try to make sure that they're on board with anything that comes out of all this.
Yeah. Okay, perfect.
And just as a review for everyone, Arizona State Trust land is land that the whole purpose is to sell it at the highest possible price to support the educational system. So they're very, very particular about granting easements or doing anything with that land other than offering it to the highest possible buyer.
And this would make it more valuable.
Yeah.
Having that connector, so, because it's access to their property, so it makes it more valuable. Okay. Anything else for the good of the order today? Nope. Not see anything? Okay, so we adjourn at 2:16.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Yeah. This is what I found.
Good job.
Website.